What if an entire town didn't just die, but was slowly poisoned, abandoned, and then wiped off the map in minutes? This isn't fiction. This is real. A place where children played on toxic hills without knowing they were breathing poison. A place where the government eventually stepped in and said there was nothing left worth saving. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, nature delivered one final devastating blow. But here's the part that sounds almost unbelievable. When the tornado hit, it didn't just destroy homes. It picked up decades of deadly waste and spread it through the air like a weapon. How does something like that even happen? And more importantly, could it have been prevented? Stay with me, because this story only gets darker. And if you're into real shocking stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. In 1913, everything changed for a quiet stretch of land in northeastern Oklahoma when lead and zinc were discovered beneath it. What had once been ordinary ground quickly turned into opportunity. Almost overnight, a mining boom took hold, and a town called Picher rose from the dust. Workers poured in from across the region, drawn by steady pay and the promise of a better life. Within just a few years, the population exploded, climbing toward 20,000 people. Streets filled with businesses, schools opened their doors, and churches anchored the growing community. Picher became more than a town. It became a symbol of prosperity built on the riches hidden underground. As the decades passed, mining defined everything about life in Picher. Thousands of men worked long hours deep below the surface, pulling valuable metals from the earth. At its peak, over 14,000 miners labored beneath the town, making it one of the most productive mining areas in the country. During World War I and World War II, Picher's importance grew even larger. The materials pulled from its mines were essential to the United States military. A significant portion of the nation's bullets and bombshells came from this single town. For a time, Picher stood proudly as a place that helped power the country through global conflict. Families built their lives there, believing the town would last for generations. But beneath that success, a quieter and far more dangerous story was unfolding. Mining companies took what they needed and left behind massive piles of waste known as chat. These towering mounds of crushed rock and toxic material rose as high as 200 feet, spreading across the landscape like artificial mountains. At first, they seemed harmless. Children climbed them, rode bikes over them, and played in the dust. Families treated them like part of everyday life. No one realized that these piles were filled with dangerous levels of lead, zinc, cadmium, and arsenic. The very thing that had built Picher was slowly poisoning it, and the damage was invisible to the people living there. In 1967, the mining finally stopped. The pumps that had kept underground tunnels dry were turned off, and the mines were abandoned. What followed made things worse. Thousands of empty tunnels began filling with contaminated water, creating a hidden network of pollution beneath the town. By the late 1970s, that toxic water started to rise to the surface. It flowed into nearby streams, turning them unnatural colors. Fish died. The land became unstable. Sinkholes began opening without warning, swallowing parts of the ground and putting entire neighborhoods at risk. What had once been a strong and stable community was now sitting on top of a fragile and dangerous foundation. By the 1980s and beyond, the full scale of the damage could no longer be ignored. In 1983, the federal government declared the area a Superfund site, marking it as one of the most contaminated places in the country. Studies revealed something even more troubling. A large percentage of children in Picher had dangerously high levels of lead in their blood. The effects were severe and permanent, causing learning disabilities and long-term health problems. Then came another devastating finding. By 2006, most of the town's buildings were considered unsafe, at risk of collapsing due to the unstable ground beneath them. Faced with this reality, the government made a difficult decision. Residents were offered buyouts and told to leave. Slowly, families packed up and moved away. Businesses closed, streets emptied. What had once been a thriving town was reduced to a quiet, hollow shell, surrounded by toxic waste and the fading echoes of its past. By the afternoon of May 10th, 2008, the atmosphere over northeastern Oklahoma had begun to shift in a dangerous way. Warm air, moisture, and powerful winds were coming together to form the perfect conditions for violent storms. Meteorologists had been watching closely as a strong system pushed across the Great Plains. The ingredients for disaster were all there, building quietly above a region that had already endured decades of hardship. Supercell thunderstorms began forming, rotating and growing stronger as they moved east. Among them, one storm stood out. It was organizing rapidly, gaining strength with every passing minute, and moving directly toward Ottawa County, where Picher sat nearly abandoned. As the storm advanced, the sense of urgency increased. A weather spotter west of Picher saw the developing rotation and reported it. Sirens began to sound across the area, warning the remaining residents that danger was approaching. The warning gave people just 19 minutes to react. That might seem like enough time, but for those still living in a town already stripped of resources and stability, it was barely anything. Many homes were in poor condition, and shelter options were limited. The storm was moving fast, leaving little room for hesitation. People scrambled to find safety, unsure of how severe the situation would become. At 5:39 in the evening, the tornado touched down near the Oklahoma and Kansas border. It did not take long to intensify. Almost immediately, it began growing into a large and violent EF4 tornado, with winds estimated between 166 and 200 miles per hour. The tornado widened as it moved, carving a path straight toward Picher. By the time it reached the town, it had become a massive wedge-shaped storm, dark and overwhelming. It arrived exactly when the warning had predicted, leaving no extra time and no second chances. What followed unfolded in a matter of minutes, but the impact would last far longer. The tornado tore through Picher with incredible force, cutting across roughly 20 city blocks. More than 200 homes and structures were destroyed or severely damaged, many completely swept away from their foundations. Cars were thrown across roads like toys. Buildings that had stood for generations were reduced to debris in seconds. Even in a town that had already been partially abandoned, the destruction was overwhelming. What little remained of Picher was effectively erased. The storm showed no distinction between old and new, occupied or empty. It simply tore through everything in its path. But this tornado carried something no other had before. As it ripped through the massive chat piles surrounding the town, it picked up and scattered the toxic waste that had defined Picher's decline. Millions of particles containing lead, cadmium, and arsenic were launched into the air and spread across the region. The storm turned decades of pollution into a weapon, distributing it far beyond the town itself. For the first time in recorded history, a tornado spread hazardous mining waste through the atmosphere on such a scale. The disaster was no longer just about wind and destruction. It had become an environmental crisis layered on top of a natural one. The human toll was just as devastating. 6 people in Picher lost their lives, many of them among the few who had chosen to remain despite the government buyouts. Young couples, lifelong residents, and visitors were all caught in the storm's path. Their stories reflected the deep ties people still had to the town, even as it fell apart around them. At least 150 others were injured, some seriously. The tornado did not stop at the edge of Picher. It continued eastward, merging with another tornado and growing even larger. As the storm crossed into Missouri, it intensified again, becoming nearly a mile wide. It struck communities with the same devastating force, throwing vehicles long distances and leveling structures in its path. 15 more people were killed in Missouri, bringing the total number of lives lost to 21. Among them was a volunteer firefighter who had been trying to help protect others. The storm became one of the deadliest tornado events in the region's history. By the time night fell, the tornado had finally weakened and disappeared, leaving behind a trail of destruction across multiple states. For Picher, the impact was final. In less than 20 minutes, the tornado had wiped away what decades of environmental damage had already weakened. The town that had once thrived, then slowly declined, was now physically shattered beyond recognition. The storm did not just destroy buildings, it exposed the full reality of what Picher had become, a place already on the brink, pushed past the point of no return. In the days after the tornado, the scale of destruction became impossible to ignore. Emergency crews moved into what was left of Picher, navigating through debris, broken foundations, and twisted metal. The damage stretched across the landscape, with entire sections of the town flattened beyond recognition. National Guard units were deployed to assist with rescue and recovery efforts, working alongside local responders to help the injured and secure the area. Survivors wandered through the ruins of their homes, searching for anything they could salvage. The town already felt abandoned before the storm, but now it looked completely erased. State and federal officials arrived to assess the situation firsthand. Walking through the wreckage, they saw a place that no longer resembled a functioning community. One official described the scene as looking like a small nuclear blast had torn through the area. The comparison captured the level of devastation. There were no intact neighborhoods, no signs of recovery waiting to begin. What remained was a broken landscape layered with both physical destruction and decades of toxic contamination. The tornado had not just damaged the town, it had stripped away any illusion that rebuilding was possible. The decision that followed was firm and final. There would be no effort to rebuild Picher. Government leaders made it clear that the existing buyout program would continue and the remaining residents would need to leave. The tornado had accelerated a process that had already been underway for years. For many of the last holdouts, this was the moment they accepted what they had resisted. They packed up what little they had left and moved on. One by one, the final residents left behind the place they had called home, closing the last chapter of a town that had once been full of life. By September 2009, Picher officially ceased to exist as an incorporated town. Its name was removed from the map in any official sense. Demolition crews moved in to clear what the tornado had not destroyed, tearing down structures that were too dangerous to remain standing. Streets that had once been lined with homes, shops, and schools were left empty. The silence that had begun during the evacuation years earlier became permanent. A town that had reached a population of 20,000 was now reduced to nothing but open land and scattered remnants of its past. Even after the town was gone, a few traces of its spirit lingered for a time. One of the most notable figures was a local pharmacist who had refused to leave during the evacuation. He stayed open as long as he could, serving anyone who still needed him, even as the town around him disappeared. His decision reflected the deep attachment many residents felt toward Picher, but eventually, even he could not hold on forever. Years later, his passing marked a symbolic end. With him gone, there were no longer any ties to the town's living community. The land itself, however, did not recover. The toxic waste that had defined Picher's decline was still there, spread across the area in massive quantities. Efforts to clean up the contamination continued, but the scale of the problem was overwhelming. Tens of millions of tons of mining waste remained, and experts estimated that the cleanup could take decades more to complete. The ground was still unstable, and the water in nearby streams remained polluted. The environmental damage that had taken years to build could not be undone quickly, if at all. The legacy of Picher extended beyond its borders. The contamination and the events surrounding the tornado drew attention to the long-term consequences of industrial activity without proper safeguards. The story of the town became a warning about what can happen when short-term gain is placed above long-term health and safety. Even years later, the area remained one of the most environmentally troubled regions in the country. The nearby creek, still affected by the pollution, was listed among the most endangered waterways in the United States. The problems that destroyed Picher did not disappear when the town did. They continued to affect the land and the people around it. Today, there is little left to mark where Picher once stood. The streets are gone, the buildings are gone, and the people have moved on. But the impact of what happened there remains. What began as a booming mining town ended as a place defined by contamination, disaster, and eventual abandonment. The tornado did not create Picher's fate, but it made it visible in a way that could not be ignored. In the end, the town's story is not just about a single storm, but about years of choices that led to a point where nothing could be saved. In the end, the tornado didn't destroy Picher. It revealed what had already been happening for decades. A thriving town built on opportunity, undone by the very industry that gave it life. The storm was just the final chapter in a much longer tragedy. Today, nothing remains but toxic land and a story that feels almost impossible to believe. A place erased not just by nature, but by years of decisions that could never be undone. If stories like this made you think, make sure to subscribe and stick around. There are many more real events like this that you've probably never heard of.